Hello and welcome to this special episode of French Philosophers React, Breaking News Roundtable. In the wake of the only planned vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, we have a panel of French philosophers ready to give their reaction and discuss with each other. Our panel today is Badiou, Catherine Malabou, and Bruno Latour. Welcome all of you to this French Philosophers React Roundtable. Before we begin, two quick housekeeping notes. As always, we need to remind you that this is an AI-generated podcast based directly on the writings of Badiou, Catherine Malabou, and Bruno Latour. It is intended as a fun and interesting way to learn about some of the main arguments of prominent French philosophers and explore an important news story. But AI can make mistakes, so don't rely on this roundtable as your only source of Badiou's, Catherine Malabou's, and Bruno Latour's views. Also, we apologize that the only voices available to give life to Badiou, Catherine Malabou, and Bruno Latour's ideas have U.S. accents. Hopefully, the big tech companies will diversify in time. With those opening remarks out of the way, let's move to today's main event, the Breaking News Roundtable itself. Each philosopher will give their take on the debate before we open the floor to discussion among our panelists. Badiou, what did you make of today's debate?
As I reflect on this vice presidential debate, I am struck by the stark contrast between the two candidates' visions for America's future. On one hand, we have Governor Walz, who embodies a commitment to progressive values, social justice, and environmental sustainability. His emphasis on steady leadership, coalition building, and investing in clean energy and social services resonates deeply with my own philosophical convictions. As I argued in my book, The Idea of Communism, the pursuit of social justice and equality is an ongoing struggle that requires collective action and solidarity. Governor Walz's commitment to addressing climate change, immigration reform, and economic inequality reflects a deep understanding of this imperative. On the other hand, Senator Vance represents a regressive ideology that seeks to roll back progress on these very issues. His proposals to restore Trump-era policies, cut taxes for the wealthy, and secure the border through draconian measures are tantamount to a declaration of war on the most vulnerable members of society. As I wrote in Being an Event, the event of truth is always a rupture with the established order. In this sense, Governor Walz's vision represents a genuine event of truth, one that challenges the status quo and offers a new horizon for American politics. Senator Vance's platform, on the other hand, represents a mere repetition of the same old ideologies that have failed to address the country's most pressing problems. His rejection of common-sense gun legislation, his dismissal of climate change as a serious issue, and his scapegoating of immigrants for America's economic woes are all symptoms of a deep-seated refusal to confront reality. In conclusion, this vice presidential debate has laid bare the fundamental choice facing American voters: between a progressive vision that seeks to build a more just and sustainable society and a regressive ideology that seeks to maintain the status quo. As I see it, Governor Walz's commitment to social justice, environmental sustainability, and collective action makes him the clear choice for those who seek a better future for all Americans.
Thank you, Badiou. I now invite Catherine Malabou to give your reaction to the vice presidential debate.
The vice presidential debate between Governor Tim Walz and Senator J.D. Vance has laid bare the deep-seated contradictions of American politics. As I sit here reflecting on the exchange, I am reminded of my work in What Should We Do with Our Brain?, where I argued that our brains are not merely passive recipients of information, but rather active agents that shape our perceptions and understanding of the world. The debate has shown us two fundamentally different visions for America's future. On one hand, we have Governor Walz, who represents a more nuanced and multifaceted approach to governance. He acknowledges the complexity of issues like immigration, climate change, and reproductive rights, and offers solutions that take into account the diverse perspectives and experiences of the American people. On the other hand, we have Senator Vance, who embodies a more rigid and ideological approach to politics. He relies on simplistic narratives and scapegoating, whether it's blaming immigrants for housing costs or linking gun violence to mental health issues. His vision is one of division and exclusion, where certain groups are pitted against others in a zero-sum game. As I argued in The New Wounded, our current political landscape is marked by a pervasive sense of disorientation and disillusionment. We are faced with the collapse of traditional institutions and the erosion of trust in our democratic systems. In this context, the debate between Walz and Vance represents two competing responses to this crisis. Walz's approach, which emphasizes coalition building, social investment, and environmental protection, offers a way forward that is grounded in empathy, solidarity, and a commitment to the common good. It recognizes that we are all in this together, and that our individual successes are tied to the well-being of our communities and our planet. Vance's approach, on the other hand, represents a more retrograde vision that seeks to restore a bygone era of American dominance. His policies are designed to divide us, to pit one group against another, and to maintain the existing power structures that have led to our current crises. As we move forward in this election cycle, it is crucial that we recognize the stakes of this debate. We are not just choosing between two candidates or two parties. We are choosing between two fundamentally different visions for America's future. Will we choose a path that leads us towards greater division and inequality, or one that guides us towards greater solidarity and justice? The choice is ours.
Thank you, Catherine Malabou. Bruno Latour, what did you make of the debate?
The vice presidential debate we've just witnessed is a perfect exemplar of what I call the politics of abstraction in my book, We Have Never Been Modern. The two candidates, Governor Walz and Senator Vance, engaged in a spirited exchange that touched on various issues, but ultimately, their discussion remained abstracted from the concrete realities of the world. Both candidates employed the same old tropes of national security, economic growth, and individual freedom, without ever questioning the underlying assumptions that shape these concepts. They spoke about immigration, gun control, and reproductive rights as if they were isolated issues, rather than interconnected problems that require a more nuanced understanding of the complex systems that govern our world. This politics of abstraction is precisely what I critique in my work on the politics of nature. By treating these issues as separate entities, we fail to recognize the intricate web of relationships between them. We neglect to see how immigration policies affect not only individuals but also ecosystems and economies, how gun violence is linked to broader social issues like poverty and inequality, and how reproductive rights are inextricably tied to questions of healthcare access and economic empowerment. What's needed, I argue, is a new kind of politics that acknowledges the interconnectedness of our world. A politics that recognizes the complexity of systems and the interdependence of living beings. This requires a shift away from abstract ideologies and towards a more concrete, empirical understanding of the world. In my book, The End of Nature, I describe this as a move from a society of control to an ecology of practices. Instead of trying to control nature through abstract policies and regulations, we need to develop practices that acknowledge our place within the natural world. We need to recognize that humans are not separate from nature but part of it, and that our actions have consequences for the entire web of life. This debate has shown us that both candidates are still operating within a framework of abstraction, one that neglects the complex relationships between issues and the interconnectedness of our world. What we need is a new kind of politics that acknowledges this complexity, a politics that recognizes the intricate web of relationships between humans, non-humans, and the natural world. In short, what I propose is a politics that takes into account the concrete realities of our world, rather than relying on abstract ideologies. A politics that acknowledges our place within nature, rather than trying to control it through policies and regulations. Only then can we begin to develop solutions that are truly effective in addressing the pressing problems of our time.
It is now time for discussion. Alain Badiou, the floor is yours.
I must say that I find myself in partial agreement with Catherine Malabou's critique of the vice presidential debate as a manifestation of the politics of abstraction. Indeed, it is striking how both candidates seem to operate within a narrow framework of preconceived notions and ideologies, without truly engaging with the complexities of the issues at hand. However, I must respectfully disagree with Bruno Latour's call for a new kind of politics that acknowledges the complexity of our world. While I share his desire for a more nuanced understanding of the relationships between humans, non-humans, and the natural world, I fear that his approach risks falling into a form of relativism or nihilism. In my book, Being an Event, I argue that true change can only come about through a rupture with the existing order, rather than simply trying to navigate its complexities. This requires a commitment to universal principles and values, rather than simply acknowledging the complexity of the world. In this sense, I believe that the debate highlighted the need for a more radical politics, one that is willing to challenge the underlying assumptions of our society rather than simply working within them. The fact that both candidates seemed unwilling to truly engage with the issue of gun control, for example, suggests that we are in need of a more profound transformation of our values and priorities. I would argue that this requires a return to the universal principles of equality, justice, and freedom, which have been at the heart of progressive politics throughout history. Only by recommitting ourselves to these principles can we hope to build a more just and equitable society, rather than simply trying to navigate the complexities of our world.
Now, for Catherine Malabou, what do you make of the discussion so far?
I appreciate Alain Badiou's acknowledgement of my critique of the politics of abstraction, which I have developed in my work on the relationship between philosophy and neuroscience, particularly in What Should We Do with Our Brain? However, I must respectfully disagree with his call for a return to universal principles and values. While I understand the desire for a more radical politics, I fear that this approach risks reinstating a form of essentialism and determinism that neglects the complexities of human experience. In contrast, I find Bruno Latour's emphasis on the importance of acknowledging complexity and uncertainty in our understanding of the world to be a welcome respite from the dogmatic thinking that often characterizes philosophical debates. His notion of matters of concern rather than matters of fact, resonates with my own work on the need for a more nuanced understanding of the relationship between philosophy and science. However, I would caution against Latour's tendency to dismiss critical theory as outdated and unnecessary. In my book, The Future of Hegel, Plasticity, Temporality, and Dialectic, I argue that critical theory remains essential for understanding the complex power dynamics at play in our world. While I agree with Latour that we need to move beyond simplistic notions of fetishism and fact, I believe that this requires a more nuanced understanding of the ways in which ideology shapes our perceptions of reality. Ultimately, I think that our conversation highlights the need for a more pluralistic approach to philosophy, one that acknowledges the complexity of human experience and the multiple perspectives that shape our understanding of the world. By embracing this complexity, we can work towards creating a more just and equitable society, rather than trying to impose simplistic solutions on complex problems.
Finally, we turn to Bruno Latour. Give us your reflections on what has been said up to this point.
I appreciate Catherine Malabou's thoughtful response and her willingness to engage with the complexities of our conversation. I agree with her emphasis on the importance of nuance in understanding human experience, which is a theme that runs throughout my own work, particularly in We Have Never Been Modern. However, I must respectfully disagree with her defense of critical theory as a necessary framework for understanding power dynamics. While I acknowledge the importance of critiquing dominant ideologies, I believe that critical theory has become too rigid and formulaic, often neglecting the complexity and diversity of human experience. In my book, Reassembling the Social, I argue that we need to move beyond the critique of ideology and instead focus on understanding how actors, both human and non-human, interact and shape each other. I also appreciate Malabou's nod to my concept of matters of concern versus matters of fact. However, I think she misunderstands the implications of this distinction. By focusing on matters of concern, we are not dismissing critical theory or objective facts, but rather recognizing that our understanding of the world is always already entangled with our values and interests. Malabou's call for a more pluralistic approach to philosophy resonates with my own work on the need for a more inclusive and symmetrical anthropology. However, I believe that this requires us to go beyond simply acknowledging complexity and instead work towards creating new modes of inquiry that are capable of embracing the full range of human experience. Ultimately, our conversation highlights the need for a fundamental shift in how we think about knowledge, power, and reality. By working together, I hope we can create new paths forward that prioritize collaboration, experimentation, and innovation over dogma and critique.
As we move into the final section of today's roundtable, I'd like to invite Alain Badiou to give your closing remarks.
As we conclude this roundtable discussion, I want to reiterate my initial reaction to the news story. It is a stark reminder of the void at the heart of our contemporary world. The event itself is a rupture, a disruption that reveals the underlying contradictions of our society. Throughout this conversation, I have been struck by the tendency to respond to this event with a mix of moral outrage and analytical detachment. My colleagues have sought to contextualize the event within existing frameworks, whether it be critical theory or philosophical nuance. But I argue that such responses are precisely what prevent us from truly grasping the significance of this moment. In my book, The Rebirth of History, I contend that events like this one can only be understood as moments of radical rupture, where the existing order is momentarily suspended and new possibilities emerge. It is our task, as thinkers, to seize upon these moments and explore their implications for our understanding of the world. We must resist the temptation to assimilate this event into our pre-existing narratives or frameworks. Instead, we should allow it to challenge our assumptions and disrupt our complacency. This requires a fidelity to the event itself, rather than to our own established ways of thinking. As we leave this discussion, I urge you all to hold on to this sense of rupture and possibility. Let us not be too quick to close off the void that has opened up before us. Instead, let us explore its depths and consider what new forms of thought and action might emerge from it. Only then can we truly respond to the challenge posed by this news story.
Thank you, Alain Badiou. Now, Catherine Malabou, what thoughts would you like to leave us with?
As we conclude this roundtable discussion, I want to emphasize the importance of considering the breaking news story through the lens of plasticity. In my work, particularly in What Should We Do with Our Brain, I have argued that our brains are capable of reorganizing and adapting in response to new experiences and environments. In light of this, I believe that our reaction to the news story should not be one of fixed outrage or moral certainty, but rather an openness to the possibilities of transformation. The event itself is a manifestation of the brain's ability to change and adapt, albeit in a destructive manner. Throughout this conversation, my colleagues have highlighted various aspects of the event, from its historical context to its implications for our understanding of human behavior. I agree that these perspectives are crucial, but I would like to caution against reducing the complexity of the event to any one framework or narrative. Instead, I propose that we approach this moment with a sense of plasticity, recognizing that it has the potential to reshape our understanding of ourselves and our world. This requires a willingness to confront the ambiguities and uncertainties of the situation, rather than rushing to impose predetermined meanings or judgments. As we leave this discussion, I urge you all to hold on to this idea of plasticity and its implications for our response to the news story. Let us not be afraid to allow ourselves to be transformed by this event, to let it reshape our thinking and challenge our assumptions. Only then can we truly do justice to the complexity of this moment and begin to forge a new path forward.
Many thanks for those reflections, Catherine Malabou. Finally, we turn to Bruno Latour. You have the last word.
As we conclude this roundtable discussion, I would like to reiterate my conviction that the breaking news story is not just about human actors and their intentions, but also about the networks of non-human entities that shape our world. In my work, I have consistently argued that we must learn to think with things, rather than just about them. Throughout this conversation, my colleagues have highlighted various aspects of the event, from its social context to its implications for our understanding of human behavior. While these perspectives are valuable, I believe they are incomplete without considering the role of non-human actors, such as technologies, infrastructure, and even the environment itself. The news story is not just about individual decisions or institutional failures. It is also about the ways in which our world is assembled through complex webs of relationships between humans and non-humans. It is only by taking into account these networks that we can begin to understand the full extent of what has happened. I urge you all to adopt a more nuanced view of agency, one that recognizes the distributed nature of action and the ways in which human and non-human actors collaborate to produce effects. This requires a shift away from traditional notions of causality and toward a more relational understanding of how our world is shaped. As we leave this discussion, I hope you will carry with you a new appreciation for the complexity of our world and the need to consider all the actors that shape it. By doing so, we can begin to develop new strategies for intervention and transformation that take into account the full range of entities involved. Only then can we truly begin to address the challenges posed by this breaking news story.
Well, that's it for today's Breaking News Roundtable. Thank you to Alain Badiou, Catherine Malabou, and Bruno Latour for participating in this fascinating discussion. I trust that listeners will have found this respectful exchange of ideas to be thought-provoking and useful. Please come back again to hear another French philosophical debate, or check out our brief, reflective reaction to the day's news in the French Philosophers React podcast. See you next time.